Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Lisa and Chris from Wisdom from the Edge here to talk about some really fascinating stuff. Um, it's something that, it's been around for a bit now. Those of you who are interested in how do we gain higher consciousness, what are some of the practices and tools that we could use, and how do we activate the pineal gland? So today's episode is about the pineal gland. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing great, Lisa. So awesome to be here. Hello to you, beautiful audience watching and listening to this podcast. I'm super excited to talk about this today because the pineal gland is a very magical part of our brain. It's basically like, and we'll get into this, of course, more, but it's really like an antenna to other dimensions in lots of ways. And it's so powerful, but the ancients also knew a lot about this too. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about what our ancient civilizations knew about the pineal gland, also known as the third eye chakra, and how we can access those higher frequencies, powers, and information that can come with that. So I'm super pumped to talk about this.
I know, I know. So, where is the pineal gland? What is it, and what's its function? And so we can get started to know that our brain is actually broken up, obviously, into two hemispheres, but it actually is in four quadrants. And if you literally cut all the way down the middle, right between the eyebrows, right here in the back, is where the pineal gland sits. And this pineal gland is very small, and it looks like a walnut. And there's a lot of things that happen, and of course, this is very ancient as well. That where there were probably more of the Eastern philosophy, where the technique of breath work and of meditation and Kriya yoga and things like that were actually used. And again, Chris can talk about this. This is his passion and his expertise. But to activate the pineal gland is to open up the seat of consciousness. And how do we open up and activate the pineal gland? Well, we know very well, actually, right now, the ways in which we can close our pineal gland. And there are a number of things that, especially in the Western world, are being used to, I'm going to say it, nefariously making sure that people are not staying in their consciousness, which our country, the United States or North America, but especially here, there is a tremendous amount of research now because there is a huge epidemic of older people getting Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is really the pineal gland calcifying. And there are a number of ways in which the pineal gland can calcify. And one of those things is fluoride. And fluoride is, of course, in toothpaste, it's in water, it's in a lot of other foods, it's in processed foods, and it's hidden and no one can see it. But it actually creates a calcification so that you do not remember. And we have an epidemic of dementia in people who get older, and now Alzheimer's. And I will say what's really kind of cool about some of the latest discoveries is that there is a correlation now between psilocybin and microdosing psilocybin, which of course is mushrooms, and how that does a reverse effect on patients who have Alzheimer's. Very, very interesting that we can talk about later. But Chris, do you want to dive in a little bit about what is the more ways in which to understand the purpose of the pineal gland?
Yeah, I mean, it's in my mind and from my research, Lisa, it really feels like it's the true radio antenna to these higher dimensions, possibly lower dimensions. It seems to be a very important, hugely important part of the brain that is completely directly linked to our consciousness and also our larger understanding of reality. And if we've talked about in other episodes, this idea of your higher self, well, the pineal gland very well seems to be that direct link to your higher self. It almost creates that bridge of communication, the less calcified it is. And the more it is trained, like any muscle or any part of our brain, and the more it is given the right nutrients, of course, and support, sound, frequencies, everything like that, to enhance it, it will continue to, like any machine or radio device, it'll just operate clearer and better. And so you'll start to find like you're going to get, you hear this common, the spiritual world, these downloads, right? Ideas that just sort of stream right in there. All of a sudden, you don't know where they came from. Well, a big part of that is your pineal gland. It's like the receiver. It's like your inbox in your email, and it's such an important link from our physical reality to the non-physical reality. And so in ancient times, the magi, which were like the magicians, the highly trained magicians of ancient Egypt, they taught about how all of our psychic abilities and all of these, let's call them maybe non-physical, metaphysical abilities, a lot of them stem from your pineal gland. And the more open that is, the more available these other technologies and these other modalities of operating in this reality are available to you. So they were basically pretty much trying to do a lot of their training to open your pineal gland. And as you said, Lisa, now we're living in a world where a lot of things are used to close our pineal gland, completely opposite. So they would do so many things in ancient times, from psychedelic journeys using things like psilocybin, or in ancient Egypt it would be like the lotus flower, or the many different ancient forms of psychedelics. Doesn't really matter, but they would use psychedelics to open this area up more and more, right? So when you do things like magic mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms, you're opening up your pineal gland. The reason I believe, this is a personal belief, I don't know what the research behind this, but for me, when I've been on psychedelics, I've realized like, oh, you're not hallucinating like a lot of people think. Oh, I'm just seeing crazy things. I think it's that it's opening up your third eye and your pineal gland so much more that you're used to, so that you're just receiving so much more information. It's like going from that radio station that's on AM radio to then 4K television, kind of a jump of that much, where that would be overwhelming. And that's kind of what a lot of people experience on psychedelics, is just this overwhelm of information. And that's where it's coming from, is this pineal gland is more open now and allowing the transmission of the universe to kind of come in a more, let's say, just higher definition. So that's kind of, one way of explaining it.
No, I love the analogy, and it reminds me of like just seeing one color and then being able to put your eye in a telescope or a kaleidoscope and then turning that kaleidoscope. That's really what the effects are, is that you're opening up the pineal gland in a way in which you, for the most part, many people don't have the context to actually understand what it is that they're seeing or experiencing, because they have not opened things up. The same thing is very true when someone has a Kundalini experience, which is the spinal fluid at the very bottom of our spinal fluid, of course, is where our coccyx is. That's that fluid. If you fall, for example, like on the ice and you hit your coccyx, a lot of people, you could die. First of all, that's been known to happen. But people also have this massive awakening, and they have the awakening because there is a connection between the pineal gland and all the way down to your spine. And so we're going to read some things today. We're going to get a little scientific, which some of you may like. I am a total science geek. I'm a light science geek, but one nonetheless. So we're going to read a few things from the book Becoming Supernatural from Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he is going to talk about a little bit, I'm just going to read a small little paragraph about what the pineal gland is. Okay. So the pineal gland is a neuroendocrine transducer secreting melatonin responsible for physiological circadian rhythm control. Okay. And we're going to talk about melatonin in just a second. A new form of biomineralization has been studied in the human pineal gland and consists of small crystals that are less than 20 microns in length. These crystals are responsible for the electric mechanical and the biological transduction mechanism in the pineal gland due to the structure of the piezoelectric properties. We're going to talk about the piezoelectric phenomenon in just a second. It's a lot of stuff to talk about, but if we break down what this actually means, is the piezoelectric properties and the transducer. The piezoelectric effect occurs when you apply pressure to a certain material and the mechanical stress in changing into the electrical charge. So there is a pressure, a push or a pull, if you will, which is part of, you don't have to actually be on any psychedelics. This is what yogis have been doing for thousands of years. When you go into a deep state of meditation through actual breath work, you're actually pulsating your pineal gland by connecting first with the sensation within, your brow area, and that pulses into your pineal gland. That's how I see it. Chris, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's like it's really interesting to think about those crystals because we know, and I've done a lot of episodes on this on my podcast, Ancient Mysteries on Earth, where we talk about how the ancients understood crystal technology and they understood how much incredible power you can generate with crystals and also store information too as a data storage. But it's really interesting to think about that very integral part of your brain, the pineal gland, just so happens to have these crystals that likely can store information, but also transmit a ton of energy, electricity, and the human being is an electrical being. I just watched the first Matrix recently, rewatched it, of course. And what are the antagonists, the bots, the AI or the robots that have taken over? What do they use humans for? Batteries. Like, we are the power source. I mean, the human being is a massive battery. We produce thousands of watts of electricity in any given moment. Really, it's incredible actually how much we produce. So our pineal glands seem to be almost like a kind of like an epicenter or like the broadcast center of all that energy, and powerful, because I know Joe Dispenza does a lot of meditation and breathwork stuff. He obviously understands that connection, because that's what I get psychedelic experiences sometimes stronger than I ever would with mushrooms or psychedelic, things that I ingest through doing breathwork. It's incredible. Right. So I know exactly what that and that undulation you're talking about to stimulate that's what I think really where the power of breathwork starts to come in.
And breathwork, by the way, I mean, Chris, you and I don't know, it may have been in another episode where there's so many different ways in which you can do breath work. I mean, Qigong breathing is something that I grew up with when I studied Chinese medicine, but there's, different ways in which you can, do yogic breathing where it's like a hot fire. That's the only word that I want to come and
breath of fire.
You know what that breath of fire? Yeah. And that's just, and that can actually bring about a whole different amount of melatonin, right? So let's talk about melatonin just for a second, because there are some really awesome new scientific facts about melatonin. It stops the excess secretion of cortisol, which is our hormone for for fight or flight, basically. It's the response that we have to stress. It improves our carbohydrate. It also heightens our immune response. It decreases the development of certain tumors. It increases the lifespan. This is in scientific laboratories. With animals, it activates the neuroprotective role in the brain. It increases our REM sleep. It stimulates free radicals scavenging, so it's anti-aging, antioxidant, and it promotes DNA repair and replication, which is really, really interesting to understand. The one other thing that I want to go back to really quick is that when I was reading of the piezoelectric effect, and then I was reading the transducer. So the transducer, let's just clarify what a transducer is. Transducer is anything that receives a signal in the form of one type of energy and converts it into a signal into another form. Boy, that sounds like alchemy to me, doesn't it?
Just a little bit.
So if you take a look around for a moment, the space you're sitting in is filled with a TV, a radio. Well, not a TV or radio, but it's filled with probably a lot of Wi-Fi waves, and they're all at different frequency ranges of invisible electromagnetic energy. For example, the antenna that you pick up in the range of frequencies carrying a signal to your computer is transduced into a picture into uh, anything that you want to see on the web. But if you look at it from wow, I can't
Transducer,
speak today.
I think.
No, a radio, with those old radios with
Like
the
transducer.
knobs.
Yeah.
Um, when you turn into an FM station, you're actually turning your antenna to a specific electromagnetic frequency. This is exactly what Chris just said. The information carried in that frequency ranges in the transduction, or that it then gets transduced into a coherent signal, which is the music you hear with your ears. So essentially, what I'm hearing is that the pineal gland, when we get it in a state of clarity and focus, what we're doing is we're using that as an antenna to be able to hear a station clearly versus hearing white noise or static. Is there anything you want to say about that, Chris?
No, I mean,
Do you want to go into, let's go into like some of the ancient, like let's go back there, because I think it's just so super cool, of how ancient civilizations have actually understood this for so long. And of course, we think that we're forging ahead, and yet I think it's a constant about remembering our past and to know our brilliance that is actually within all of us.
yeah, I mean, they were quite knowledgeable of this, and this can be found throughout the world in many cultures. But we have a lot of evidence in ancient Egypt. More than anything, I'll share my screen quickly here, and I'll pull up a couple of images that I think will help give a sense now of what we're working with here. And can you see it okay on your screen, Lisa? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So this is just one example. This is the side brain. So when Lisa was kind of talking about the makeup of our brain, this is really what it looks like if you chopped it right down the middle in half. All right. So this is a side view of a brain chopped in half. And I'll zoom in here. And on the right-hand side, we have the Eye of Horus, which is a very, everyone probably recognizes this ancient Egyptian symbol. A lot of people get tattoos of this, very popular image. And look at the similarity. You see the corpus callosum, which looks very much like this eyebrow, you could say, of the third eye symbol here from ancient Egypt. The actual, if you look into like the thalamus part of the brain here, right in that center, that's what looks like the eye, like the actual iris or whatever of the Eye of Horus here. And so on and so forth. I won't go through it all here, but you can start to see when you look at the brain from this side perspective, all of a sudden you're seeing ancient Egyptian symbols that are mimicking the exact shape of this part of your brain. First question is, how the heck did they know what this part of your brain looks like? They would have had to have autopsied and cut the brain in half and done all that stuff. Now, that's obviously possible, but the other crazy thing is, why is it that this symbol that represents a lot of things, but one of the main things is to see clearly reality through the Eye of Horus? Well, why is it that it's representing the exact place of your pineal gland and all the other aspects of your brain that help with higher levels of consciousness? You can also see the hypothalamus right here with, again, part of the ancient Egyptian symbol. And that hypothalamus comes down here. And then what is it attached to? It attaches to your spinal cord eventually. And Lisa, you're just mentioning with these Kundalini awakenings, right? Where that spinal fluid at the bottom of the spine kind of comes out all the way up and then connects to your brain. Well, that's where it connects to your brain. And so they're even kind of acknowledging that connection in this part of the symbol here, where they're just a straight line down. So you've got a lot of this. There's also, I might pull it up in a moment when I have a bit more time to type in here, but there's also not so long ago artwork, Michelangelo. If you go into the Sistine Chapel and you look at the famous photo of of God and I think it's Adam touching fingers or whatever, that very famous image. I'll pull it up in a moment, but you actually, there was a really amazing study that did that, and you actually look at that image from the perspective that we're looking here with the half of the brain, and that image actually fits the brain structure perfectly, and also somehow symbolically talks about higher consciousness through the symbolism of a brain. So basically what I'm trying to say is that, as you can see in a lot of these images here, the ancients, they know not only what our brain looks like, but they know very specifically the parts of our brain that are attached to higher levels of consciousness. This is a very close-up view of the pineal gland right here. And again, it's exactly like the iris in the eye. Like they're telling us this is the place where you can see the most clearly is your third eye, or a lot of cultures call it your first eye, not your third eye. It's your first eye. So you see that, I think even here, when you see the pine cone is a very ancient symbol from ancient Egypt. It's also all over the Vatican. And the pine cone also represents the pineal gland, because the pine cone looks a lot like the pineal gland, and because of the pine cone's more protruding, parts of its shape and how it's made up, kind of represent what I'm thinking, at least right now, of Lisa, when you're talking about Dispenza explaining the crystalline part of the pineal gland. I'm like, well, that makes so much sense that the ancients would use a pine cone to represent the pineal gland, because the pine cone also sort of seems to represent these crystals that are these bumps on the pineal gland. So, I mean, they're just going to these very symbolic and then also extremely practical explanations for the pineal gland in its relation to higher levels of consciousness, and also in its relation to multiple ways and levels of perceiving reality, of gaining information, and ultimately, I guess, of seeing more. So I'm just going to stop now on the screen share.
No, that's fantastic. I love that. And I think, just for the purpose of this, it would be really interesting. I'm going to dive back into Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural. He talks about the piezo electric effect. And this is one of many ways in which you can activate the pineal gland. But, again, it is through breathing techniques that you can get there the most natural way. And you can get there quicker, quite frankly, than any medication or any other substance can actually get there. But it does take practice. And what he's saying here is that that there are these tiny crystals. They're approximately 1 to 20 microns in length, and these particular piezoelectric effects into the pineal gland are calcite crystals. And you can only see them as a microscopic, right? They look like they're white. And when those get activated through breath work and through meditation, is when all of a sudden the pineal gland gets actually activated. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm just going to read on of what he says here, that the word piezoelectric is a derivative of a Greek word, is paisan, which means to squeeze or press. The piezo means to push. So that's what we were saying earlier, is
Wow.
that really what this is, I know, isn't that cool? Is that it's really meant to like push and activate the pineal gland. So it's no coincidence that he asked people, because I've taken many of his workshops, that when he does the breathwork technique with the audience, he actually asks people to hold their breath. And so he says, when I ask you to hold your breath and squeeze those intrinsic muscles. So really, when you go through a breathing technique with him, he asks you to bring the breath up from your diaphragm, or from your abdomen, through your diaphragm, all the way up. So this is a Qigong breathing method, all the way up to the top of your head. And then when you bring it up to the top of your head, you actually hold that breath and you squeeze your intrinsic muscles, right? So that's like in your base. Okay, you're squeezing your muscles before you then decide to um, release that breath. But what is happening when you squeeze your intrinsic muscles is you're actually producing um, fluid, spinal fluid. You're activating that spinal fluid. So imagine that you're not only working to activate the third eye, right? That's actually pushing and opening and activating, but you're squeezing and pressing those intrinsic muscles that are starting to move from the base up. So what is going to happen well, that's what he calls the piezoelectric effect. So he says when you do this, you are pushing the spinal fluid up against the pineal gland, exerting mechanical stress on it. This mechanical stress translates into an electric charge. And this is the exact action that compresses the stacked crystals in the pineal gland and creates a piezoelectric effect. The crystals of the pineal gland generate an electromagnetic or an electric charge in response to the stress you're applying. So when I hear that, and I have had moments, I'm sure you have had, Chris, as well, that he's actually saying on a very tactical level, there's a way in which you can activate these crystals in your pineal gland by not only doing certain deep breathing techniques, holding that breath, and then squeezing your intrinsic muscles, and then slowly decreasing that breath and exhaling that breath. What happens is that there's like an explosion that happens within your mind. And the pineal gland becomes opened fast and quick. And I have had this happen to me many times through my own practice of meditation and breath work, where I want to get to a certain space, if you will, before I relax. So typically it takes about 15 minutes or so for me. When I'm sitting there, I know exactly what to do. I am doing those intrinsic squeezes. And I am also visualizing that all of my chakra points that are aligned with my body itself are opening. So crown, and I can, you can look at it as like a lotus petal, so you just envision a lotus petal opening up all the way here in your crown, your third eye, your throat, your heart, and you go all the way down to your base. And when you open that up and you can feel it actually activate, and then for me, I know that I'm ready to just let go. And I just go back to my normal breathing. And then I just let the source take over, really. What about you, Chris? What has been your experience when you know that you've had kind of this third eye awakening process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. It's a really interesting feeling. I mean, for me, most recently, it's come from the most frequently with breath work, and specifically exactly what we've been talking about. A lot of holding the breath, squeezing in your pelvic region, or your like the muscles that you use to like hold in your pee or anything like that, sexual organs, like you pull that in. I think the yogic term is mula bandha, when you hold it in and then hold in a lot of other areas in your body to really push that air up to the top and like create like a pressure almost to activate your pineal gland. And so I've had quite a few experiences just even recently with breath work in that, and it's very, for me, how it kind of comes about is that all thought just dissolves. So, and we think a lot as beings. I know I do. Most of us are usually in constant thought all the time. And so that's an immediate thing to notice, is that thought just dissolves. It's like the mind gets wiped clean, and it's the most beautiful feeling ever to not think. And then I find I get, my vision actually gets a little wonky. I start to see kind of like stars in a way, because I've got kind of a head rush sensation going as well. So things get very tingly, but then I also feel like I'm seeing sort of light sparks that are maybe part of some other aspects of our dimensions here. I don't know if they're in this physical reality all the time. So I'm starting to sort of ask questions. I'm like, how much am I seeing through my third eye versus these physical eyes? Because I start to see a lot of I don't know how to describe them, but like little bits of energy moving around, and I'm like, I don't think that.
Kaleidoscope.
Thank you. It's a very kaleidoscope, and they look like multicolored. Like I can't say a color. They don't. They just look like all kinds of colors, just really quick flying around. And then I try to look and focus. Anyway, so that's usually what happens to me when I do certain breath work, especially, and combine it with sound and music as well. Combining it with certain frequencies as well can help us enhance and bring you to that experience even faster. Binaural beats can be great for that. Anything with 432 hertz tune music can be great for that too. So for me, it's definitely, it's profound, and it's always, if anything, a little addictive, but a healthy addiction, because it's a utter peace. And then it creates so much space. And then I usually just typically get so many ideas and downloads because I've created space.
I think that's the one thing that is the most important for maybe the listener, viewer, is why. Why is it that there is this human phenomenon that now is taking a front and center stage, that more and more people are awakening? And what is it all about? And what's the resistance to it for those who are like, I can't meditate? It's like, well, as we've said many times in this in the podcasts, it's breath work is the foundation. So when we can learn how to breathe, and thanks to wonderful people and authors like Joe Dispenza to kind of break down. I mean, he's very, very scientific in what he's breaking down, but what the discoveries are showing is the incredible profundity that our human body has the capacity to do. And as a spirit in human form, which I believe we all are, but we don't remember, when we do remember, then life seems to be more of a playing field for us, where we get to choose how we want for life to unfold. Not that we are avoiding pain and upset, or that life is only supposed to be, altruistic, even though I believe that there is that potential for all of us, but that we get to not be wrapped up so much in the emotion of what is happening in life, taking a step back, seeing a different perspective, being able to be more compassionate, more empathetic, have more clarity. And Chris and I are very similar in that meditation is wonderful to combat stress and to help with sleep and to lower anxiety, including all the physiological things like lowering blood pressure. But at the end of the day, I'm interested to see where I can go and what magic can get released in me so that I have these aha moments on a regular basis that I wouldn't have had because my mind is always going to be busy with things to think about. So, Chris, is there anything else from the ancient mysteries that you would like to talk about? Because I just find that to be fascinating before we close up.
Yeah, we're really like, what we're remembering right now is the technology of our human bodies, and it's technology. We have completely been left astray or forgotten our own. It's like being given a cell phone or smartphone and only using it to put your contacts, like your addresses and stuff, using it as an address book. You're not using it as a camera. You're not using it as, any form of internet connection, a billion freaking apps you can download. You're not using it for any of that, just this one function. That's how we're operating right now in a lot of ways for our human being bodies, is just this. We're probably tapping into about 1% of really what we could be doing with this incredible body that we have, combined with our amazing spirit. And so the ancients seem to be a lot more obsessed and learned in this area of how to use this body as the technology, not always looking outside of ourselves for all this amazing technology, which is fine too. But they were always like, no, we're looking within this body for the technology to communicate with anyone, anywhere in the freaking universe, because we can do that through quantum entanglement and telepathy and things like that. Or name a thing. I mean, I'm sure they got to a point likely where they were able to manifest things into reality with just their mind, or at the very least could move things and manipulate matter in reality with their mind. So, and the body, right? So I wanted to share my screen and show you the one thing I was talking about before, because it's a really interesting image. It did blow my mind many years ago when I first came across this. And if anyone's going to, the Vatican anytime soon, you want to check out the Sistine Chapel. When you look at Michelangelo's very famous portrait, take a deeper look now when you look at that, and like you can see the original, right, where it's like, okay, that's whatever. That's not a very good version of the original. There we go. This one's better. So this is like the original, right? And just like, okay, it's just a painting, but when you overlay the brain, which they have done in some of these photos here, you kind of go back to it, like, look at the shape of the fabric. It just so happens to be that like exact shape, not only of the brain, but look at God and the way Michelangelo's painted his body, and the shape of his body looks so similar to, the vagus nerve connecting to the spinal cord. That's basically like the third eye seems to be located roughly in God's like sacral area, which is interesting because that's where, at least masculine life force energy is birthed there. So that's an interesting piece of symbolism. I don't know what they're trying to say specifically. That's a bigger discussion. But I've watched like an hour breakdown on this image alone. I mean, you can really dive deep into what Michelangelo is trying to tell us. And this is just from recent history. So you don't even have to look back into ancient times to see. Throughout history in general, we have always been given clues as to how we can tap in to our true potential and our higher selves. And another example of this are Gothic cathedrals, all around the world that have sacred geometry everywhere. And they talk about a lot of enlightenment or ways to commune with God are through this third eye. And even in depictions of Jesus and stuff, you sometimes see even a star or some sort of symbol in the middle of his forehead. Look at Indian culture to this very day. What are they doing with the red dot in between their eyes? They're marking their third eye. They're marking, the way to see higher truths in reality. And that's all throughout Indian history. So, I mean, you see it there. You see it with the uraeus in ancient Egyptian, where the snake is coming out of the third eye. You look through any of these ancient cultures and just start to, when you look for it, you'll see references to the third eye everywhere. And not just the third eye, but also what the third eye even looks like in a tangible way. When I was showing you before the Egyptians and how they show you through the Eye of Horus symbol, a physical representation of what the brain even looks like, chopped in half from a side view. So these ancients knew a lot. The more we listen to them and can recognize the wisdom that they're sharing to us from the past, that's also going to be a great way to catapult ourselves into new levels of awareness now. So we're checking out, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. I'm grateful for your knowledge on the subject very much, and showing us, having some good show and tell. If you like what we are bringing, absolutely give us a thumbs up. We'd really appreciate it. Subscribe. And we are so grateful to you for continuing to stay with us, listener and viewer. And Chris, it's always a pleasure. I love it. We can probably talk about this for the next hour. But for now, I think this is enough to chew on. And we'll see you soon.
See you, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Wisdom from the Edge.
Namaste.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Wisdom from the Edge. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. And make sure, if you haven't already, to follow, like, and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate that. It actually helps us out quite a lot in growing this platform. And also leave us a comment if you haven't already. We'd love to hear from you, hear your thoughts about what you enjoyed on this episode and things that you want to offer, maybe ideas for a new episode or things that you want to hear more about. Also, make sure to check out our website, wisdomfromtheedge.org. All that is in the description below. And you can learn more about what we do, what offerings we have, and of course, the courses and programs. There's lots to learn from, a lot of really cool resources to check out to enhance your everyday life. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Wisdom from the Edge.